What is up guys, it's your boy Solheim here, back with another Classic WoW video for the fresh Classic WoW servers. Now today we have a massive update for the server themselves, so we have some changes that are now confirmed by Blizzard when it comes to some new things happening on the server itself. I'm not gonna waste too much of your time today, but I did make a video very recently where I highlighted some of the possible changes that people were asking for that could end up being on these servers. Now for anyone who's been out of the loop, this is about the 20th anniversary servers, so they're launching on November 21st, or in 3 days from now. And last minute, well I say last minute, today, so 3 days before the servers came out, Blizzard actually listened to feedback, and they're putting some changes into these servers to make the game arguably way different than what it was back in 2019. So these changes are highlighted right here in a recent Wowhead update, or a blue post update from Blizzard as well, where they cover some additional changes they're making to the servers, and I'm not going to read the entire thing because we have done that in a previous video, but you can see this entire post, which is basically about the 20th anniversary realm information, and everything in this post was already out, except for what's above this one line at the top. So everything I'm highlighting right now was updated today. Everything that is under this line has always been here, and that was like the things we already know, like the realm sizes, the realm rule sets, the Burning Crusade Classic part, no changes, and the changes philosophy and everything like that. We have an individual video on that part. However, after working through a great deal of player feedback, we've decided to provide some additional changes that will be a part of Anniversary Realms. So based on that, this looks to be a part of every single Anniversary Realm, PvE, PvP, and Hardcore. Number 1, instant mail between characters on the same account. Number 2, the removal of the buff and debuff limit, and number 3, dual specs. Instant mail and removal of the debuff / buff limit will be implemented at launch, and dual spec will be enabled at a later date. So dual spec will not be there from the start, but I would assume a couple of weeks in, maybe a month in tops. So based on that, I want to ask you guys, how do you feel about this? Are there any of these changes that you are happy to see, or are there any changes you are not happy to see? For me, first of all, instant mail, I don't see any downsides with instant mail whatsoever. That's a huge W by itself. Dual talent specialization, I'm very happy with, even though I can see some of the negative aspects, perhaps. So one of the negative aspects could perhaps be that you can now change spec anywhere in the world, including inside raids, which means it might become somewhat mandatory to actually have a dual talent spec as well, because certain specs will perform better on certain bosses. So you will be very incentivized to respec even in the middle of a raid, because certain specs just perform better, like for example single target fights versus AoE fights. And in some cases, if you're a frost mage for example, you might have one single target spec and an AoE spec, and you might even be swapping back and forth between trash and bosses as well, and then swapping from boss to boss depending on the actual boss fight. Now that's not a huge drawback. The only thing is that will pretty much make dual talent a requirement to raid, or at least on a high level you will need dual talent. But I mean, when dual talent spec is in the game, you will want to have it anyway, and the positives here way outweigh the demand if you ask me, like healers for example, finally being able to heal in raids and not feeling useless when they're questing, so you can quest as a DPS, and then you can have a healer spec as well, and just swap on the go. And it will make doing dungeons and finding people for dungeons way easier, trust me on that one, because now you don't just have to be like when you're level 60 and you're making a spec. The barrier to entry for a DPS warrior to tank, if you're doing a high level dungeon, he might, especially on hardcore, he might want to have the spec to tank, because, well, you want to have those talents to increase your defense, your skill, your block chance. Having those talents put in the right place for tanking will increase your survival and make it easier for you to tank. That's pretty obvious. So when it comes to finding warriors that will be willing to tank, that barrier to entry is now way smaller, because any warrior can have one DPS spec and a tank spec. Now, likewise, you will have a way easier time finding healers for dungeon as well, because now, if you're leveling as a Shadow Priest, which, let's be real, who levels as a Shadow Priest anyway, well, now you can, and then you can also heal inside dungeons without feeling like you're handicapped by being a Shadow Priest trying to heal. Same thing for a Druid, who can level as Feral, and have a Resto spec to heal with as well, if you're leveling whenever these changes or whenever the dual talent spec is actually implemented into the game. It just makes those barriers to entries way smaller. Paladins, for example, if you're leveling as a Holy Paladin, it can be a little bit of a drag, but then you can level as Ret now, and you can still heal the dungeons as a Holy Paladin as well. And that is just for the leveling aspect, but at max level as well, you can also be a, like anything, DPS, and then have a healer off spec. Now, with the debuff limits being taken away as well, you also have certain classes will be performing better, because now they can finally use their debuffs. Previously, in Classic WoW, some classes were not allowed to use what they could use. They couldn't even use their full toolkit. As a hunter, for example, I could not even use Serpent Sting. At least now, I can use Serpent Sting, and it might not be the best DPS increase, but it's definitely a DPS increase. Now, going back to my previous point real quick, I believe that dual talent specialization will make this, like these servers just feel way better to play on. I remember back in Classic WoW 2019, there was a huge tank and healer shortage when it came to just doing dungeons, because everyone were either in their DPS spec and didn't want to, like most people were in a DPS spec, or in whatever spec they raid as, and they didn't really want to pay 50 gold or whatever it was to respec for a couple of dungeons to help somebody out. Well, now you don't have to with the dual talent spec actually being here. And when it comes to raiding in Classic WoW, you usually have 2 tanks, 4 or 5 healers, depending on if you play hardcore or not. If you play hardcore, you might have more tanks and more healers, but let's just say you have 2 tanks, you have 4 healers. Well, now you have 34 DPS. That means, in general, when it comes to doing dungeons, you have way more DPS than you have both healers and tanks. That shortage will now be less, and finding tanks and healers to do content with will once again be way easier. Now, when it comes to that dual talent specialization thing, I just want to say that there's basically 2 different ways Blizzard can, and very likely will do this, like they will choose one of 2. Number 1, it's taught to you by the trainer. Number 2, it's taught to you by the same NPC that was introduced in Season of Discovery. So anyone who hasn't played Season of Discovery, we currently have dual talent specializations in Season of Discovery, and this is taught to you by a special NPC. We, for example, have Gwendog Brightbeard, the Dwarf of Many Talents, and you simply talk to this NPC, and he will give you dual talent specialization for 50 gold. So just to give you some early information on what you should be looking out for, it's either your class trainer or this NPC right here, which is in Ironforge for Alliance, and he's in Orgrimmar for the Horde, I believe, and he's going to be like over here in the Forlorn Cavern, for example, in Ironforge, or somewhere in Orgrimmar. So it's either this NPC from Season of Discovery, or your class trainer, and the only indication we have so far is 50 gold, based on, once again, Season of Discovery. So yeah, we're finally getting dual talent specializations in Classic WoW. I am incredibly excited about this, planning to play a mage again, and being able to both have a raiding spec and a gold farming spec on a mage is absolutely insane, because in Classic WoW I had to keep respecking every single week, and I mean that's just 50 gold down the drain, right? Now we don't have to do that anymore, and we can save that gold. Either way, let me know your thoughts on everything in the comments down below, and I will be making a bunch of gold making content to hopefully help you guys be able to afford your level 40 mount, level 60 mount, and even dual talent specialization, and those videos will be coming out after the launch of these servers. That being said, we have a couple of these videos available right now that you can get access to in one of 2 ways. Number 1, you can get my gold making guide for Classic WoW, which is linked down below, and getting this guide covers all all of the gold farms that I will be doing when I'm leveling, and even at max level. We have a bunch of gold farms in that guide, and we also have a bunch of investments, so you can both farm for gold and put the current gold you have into investments to get a huge return on those investments. So if you want to make more gold in Classic WoW on these fresh servers, check it out, the link is down below. And method number 2 is by supporting me on Patreon. At the moment we have 3 videos available on Patreon, 2 of them are in early access, and 1 of them is exclusively available only on Patreon, and that one covers arguably the best way to make gold on these fresh servers. Either way, as always, I appreciate you watching the video, thank you so much, and I'll see you again in the next one very soon.